Good morning and welcome to Goshen Church Online. I'm glad you made it your choice to join us this morning. This morning I want to continue looking at the letters to the seven churches that we started the week before last in the book of Revelation. Today the passage we're going to be reading is from Revelation chapter 2, looking at verses 8 through 11. The first church, just as a reminder, that we looked at the week before last was the church at Ephesus. God had told the church that they were performing well, they had everything together, but they had lost their heart for the work. He told them and us today that the motivation behind all of our hard work should be done out of a love for God. And if we've lost that love, we need to go back and pick it up from wherever we dropped it and return to that first love. Today's letter to the church in Smyrna was different from the letter that the church in Ephesus received. I really kind of want you to get a picture of what that church was going through. Just kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people that would have been in that church and that originally heard this letter. The way we understand what was going on there, it would say that this church had gathered probably secretly in someone's house, and they'd all kind of slipped in quietly at different times, not to draw attention by the local community. Their numbers probably had been down because their friends and family members had either quit coming or had been persecuted and killed or beaten and thrown in prison. They all probably looked very tired and hungry, bad bruises on their body, not really knowing what was going to happen to them or what was how they were going to survive. Hoping to hear some good news, I'm sure that they hung on to every word that John wrote to them. You know, one of them begins to open the letter. To me, that it would seem that they would all be quiet, hushed, just hanging on to every word that was said to them. And that's where I want to hear those words. And it says, "Unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write these things, saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death." Smyrna, it was another interesting city at that time. It was a city that claimed to have the oldest alliance with the Roman Empire. It was a beautiful city at that time. Now, 7 years before that, it wasn't the case. It was destroyed in war and left for ruins. For almost 300 years, it was just a shell. The city was resurrected by Alexander the Great. He had a dream of what this city could become, and he began to build it. Of the 7 churches that John wrote to in Revelation, this is the only one that is still in existence today. This is the modern-day city of Izmir in the country of Turkey. So you can see that there was definitely this theme of resurrection in that church, or in that city already. A lifeless, destroyed town that was brought back to life. Jesus, he even makes reference in the verse 8 to saying, "I was dead but brought back to life," talking about his resurrection, telling them, I know something about resurrection, and it supersedes the resurrection that happened to your city. Continuing with this idea of death and life, the name Smyrna means myrrh, and this was a fragrant resin that was used medicinally, but also was used during the burial process when preparing the body. This town held the sole rights to produce this product, and at that time most likely produced the myrrh that was brought to Jesus by the wise men, and also the myrrh that was used in his burial after his death on the cross. In verse 9 of the passage we read today, John tells the church that God saw the tribulation that they were going through. This word tribulation means a burden that crushes. It comes from a very specific type of torture that was inflicted on people at that time. What they would do is lay this person down and pile weights on them until eventually the weight would crush them and kill them, being more than their physical body could withstand. In the passage that we read, I see four weights that was causing tribulation or were crushing that church at Smyrna. The weight of poverty, slander, imprisonment, and death. Let's examine the four weights of tribulation this morning and see how we can use that to apply it to our lives today. The first weight that I see is a weight of poverty. Since the city of Smyrna was an ally of Rome and a free state, they did not come under direct control of Rome. This seemed like a shaky alliance because they were seemingly afraid that they would lose that privilege that they had with the Romans. That the Christians, they refused to say that Caesar was Lord, which caused the people of Smyrna that lived there to hate them for fearing that the Roman would step in and take them over, trying to squash this rebellion. The people were persecuted immensely here. They were kicked out of the trade groups, which was really the only way you could have an occupation back then. Even if they tried to set up a little roadside stand, it would get destroyed. All of their goods would be stolen. So most of the Christians in Smyrna were unemployed, just living in poverty. The word here used for poverty is simple. It's not just simply being poor. It's the idea of extreme poverty, and the idea of a beggar is in there. This church had nothing. But there's something interesting in that verse. Right after he says, I see your poverty, he says, but thou art rich. From the world's perspective, from the rest of Smyrna's perspective, this was just a joke. These people had nothing. They were destitute, no money or possessions. They lived in a society. It was a beautiful society. The flowers, this beautiful city, the money, possessions. This was another seaport town, so goods were coming and going. The people around them were very affluent. But God looks at the people in this church and tells them, he says, you are truly richer than those around you. I'm reminded of the parable of the rich man who had a bumper crop and decided to tear down his barns and build bigger barns. Jesus tells this story after a man came to him and asked to settle a inheritance problem with him, asking Jesus to tell his brother to give him his inheritance. Jesus responded and said, I'm not a judge or lawyer, but he warned the man. He says, beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth. It wasn't about the possessions that the Smyrna people had. It was about the love and following God that the church in Smyrna had. That's where the riches were. God recognized that church of Smyrna had real wealth that they were building up in heaven, wealth that really mattered. In this world, we may not ever gain great riches, but how much sadder would it be to live your whole life and not have God's riches in your life? We may never have that wealth, but we can live our lives for God and compassionately help our community with the little that we have and love those that are hurting, even though they may hate and persecute us for our beliefs. Regardless of our bank account, we as Christians need to be known for our wealth of love, and love that comes from God and love that actively flows through us to the world around us. The church did not let their poverty define them. They persevered on and in their faith. The second weight I see pressuring the Smyrna church was slander. That there was a very large community of Jewish people in Smyrna at that time and had actually worked out a deal with the government where they did not have to proclaim that the Roman Caesar was Lord, since the Romans accepted their religion. Christianity was not accepted, so it only stood to hurt not only stood to hurt the Gentile citizens of Smyrna, but also stood to hurt the Jewish practicing citizens who were family members of these Christian believers there. Their own family members, these Jewish people, were slandering their family members, trying to get rid of the Christians. They accused the church of having orgies when they gathered, where all kinds of filth happened. And just like we do in our church today, the church back then called their members brothers and sisters. The Jewish people told the authorities that the Christians were undermining the Roman stand on family. Surprisingly, the Romans had a very high opinion of the nuclear family, of the mother and father and children. And like any other culture that was big on family, anyone that held family as unimportant was just despised. And so they were trying to use that maneuver to make the Christians look bad. They were lying, saying that the Christians were breaking up families and distorting that nuclear family. They were also accused of cannibalism because they took the communion. It was done to signify the body and blood of Christ, to remind them of Christ's redeeming work on the cross. But the Jewish people were distorting it, saying that they were promoting cannibalism. They were eating real bodies and drinking real blood during their services where they had communion. These Jewish people were all afraid of losing their exemption and was trying to get rid of the troublemaking Christians and get them out of the picture. The weight of this slander made it very difficult for the Christian people. People were disgusted with them. I'm sure they lost friends and families and were, again, harassed and tortured for these lies that were told about them. In our own world today, we're at a point where lies are told about us. We are slandered because of our supposed archaic beliefs. You don't have to go very far on the internet to see crazy things being said about us. You know, we've been blessed for many years, but there is a major shift that is happening in our world today that doesn't see Christians the way it has in the past. I've said before, I believe these things will continue to get worse. That means that we will face things we haven't in the past. But we need to remain strong, knowing that there will be extreme pressure from the world around us. But God is going to be there with us and strengthen us, comfort us during those difficult times. Church, we need to prepare today. Grow strong for that coming storm because we will face it. The last two pressures I see on the church that caused tribulation for the church of Smyrna was imprisonment and death. As that church sat quietly listening to that letter of John, I would say they were comforted to know that God knew what they were going through. He knew about that weight that was pressing them down. But what they were told next, it did not bring them much comfort. They were told that things were going to get worse. What they were going to go through was prison sentences and death even. You know, the prisons were pretty foul at that time. And they were pretty much a death sentence on themselves. There's no bathroom. They were filled with rats and very little food. They were even faced with being thrown to wild animals to be killed, nailed to trees, and being even set on fire. I think of one of the most famous preachers from that city was a man named Polycarp. He was able to stay away from the government for years, and he preached and taught to the people and did so much. But at the age of 86, he finally stopped running and was caught by the soldiers. The proconsul brought him in front of him and told him, he said, you're a pretty old guy. I feel bad about killing you. Just burn a little incense and say that the Roman emperor's God. That's all you got to do is just that. And Polycarp's response was, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king and my Savior? This made that proconsul angry, and he sent him to be burned at the stake. The fire was set, and he would have been burned out, but a gust of wind came through and put out the fire, and the soldiers just took a spear and finished him. To the very end, Polycarp remained faithful to the God who had kept him and protected him his whole life. I said before, I don't know how bad things are going to get in our world. I don't want to spread fear. I don't want to needlessly say things that would cause us to be scared. But there are people killed daily in our world for their beliefs in God. There may come a day when we who have enjoyed God's blessing for many years face prison or maybe even worse because of our beliefs. But we see next in this passage that this tribulation wasn't just it. They did have something to look forward to. We see the triumph of the Smyrna church. The church was encouraged, and we can take courage from what John wrote to them today. Look at that last part of verse 10 again with me. It says, "And ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the church. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death." He tells them that this tribulation is only for 10 days. And this was just a saying back then that just meant for a short time. So their weights of torture were for a short time. But if they remain faithful unto their end, the reward would be great. He talks about that crown of life waiting for him. And I would say that crown really hit home with him. At that time, the only people who were able to receive crowns were those that participated in the games or the local parties that they would give these crowns as rewards. So the Christians not participating in the games and the parties weren't able to ever receive the crowns. They stood out from the world because of this. But they were going to receive a greater crown, a crown of life that they were promised them, that eternal life, a much better prize than all the crowns ever given to the citizens of Smyrna. Today, we as Christians are slandered for being Christians. We're starting to see the world call us dangerous and bigoted, anti-choice, anti-diversity, intolerant. I believe eventually it will lead to economic boycotts or restrictions on us as Christians, even rejection from our communities, and possibly even more severe persecution. But our response as Christians needs to be what we saw in today's passage. Not to be afraid. Expect that some of these things are going to come and remain faithful. Matthew reminds us in chapter 10, he says, "And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved." A while back we studied in Ephesians 6, and it just comes to my mind. The Bible says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand, stand." I know this is not one of those feel-good sermons today, but we need to understand the reality of the world that we're living in and be prepared. Right now we're only seeing a little bit of trouble for Christians around us, but we have to be prepared for what's coming ahead. We need to put on our spiritual armor and grow stronger spiritually so that we can remain steadfast and stand in our faith to the end. This life is short, and what we endure is only temporary. But if we endure, the eternal reward we are promised as Christians is well worth it. Today I challenge you to build that relationship now, grow stronger, and prepare for that fight ahead.